Okay, good morning. It's so fantastic to see you all. I'm in that awkward position of breaking up what feels like a family reunion precisely to host a family reunion. So, no, it's so great to see everyone just in conversation with smiles and joyful here today, and a full room to boot. This is really a joy to be hosting this event. I am Greg Johnson. I'm director of the Walter H. Capps Center for the Study of Ethics, Religion, and Public Life here at UCSB. And all right. Thank you. It is really a humbling honor to be in this position to honor someone's legacy of this magnitude. I didn't know Walter myself personally, but I was, let's say, subjected to his genius in graduate school by way of a very large book on the history of religious studies. That's how I came to know him. And I came to appreciate that not only did he contribute in so many primary ways to the discipline of religious studies through his own research, but he was also the master storyteller of the discipline, that he told us who we are, where we came from, and the various possibilities for what we could do, not just theoretical work, but also practical work. That side of the equation, the practical, didn't always land well among colleagues, too political, too engaged, so forth. Turns out it had staying power, that the Academy on its best day does go that direction. And the Capps Center, it's our mandate to do just that, and I'm proud to be in a position to help in a modest way move that agenda forward. So we have 2 days in front of us. I'll be brief here, by the way. 2 days of celebration events. Obviously, today we have the Value of the Humanities panel now. Then we'll take a lunch break, and you're all invited to join us. We'll have a number of boxed lunches. And then at 1 p.m., we'll resume with a star-studded panel of former students of Walters to talk about their work in religious studies and cognate disciplines. Then there is a public reception in the same space immediately following. So please join us for all of that. Tomorrow, we move to Campbell Hall, the site of the legendary Vietnam course and the Stranger course. Now, understand this up front. We don't expect to fill Campbell Hall. If we do, hooray for us. It's not that we're wildly out of touch with, say, demography, weekends, and things like that. But when we consulted Lois and Laura about where best to host such an event, immediately that was the reaction. Let's go to the space where the magic happened, as Laura put it. And so that's where we'll be all day tomorrow for several sessions about the famous classes, and then winding up, then segueing after lunch to a session with Alessandro Duranti, who did remarkable work doing a video ethnography of Walter's campaign in '96, and we'll share footage and remarks about that. And then our final panel on the ongoing value of public life with the Capps family and Senator Bob Kerrey, and special guest appearance by Lou Cannon. And then followed by another reception. So 2 days that should be joyous. The weather is cooperating with us, so this is a delight. To have the family in the room with us is such a special thing. I'm just delighted you're here and that you've participated in making this happen. And the same for friends and colleagues. Without fail, as we reached out to people, would they like to be involved? It was all we needed to know about the legacy of Walter Capps that everyone said yes right away. Just fantastic. A special thanks to my friend and colleague, Professor Mazuzawa over here. This is in part her inspiration. At a meeting a year and a half ago, she said, "Surely we're due to celebrate the legacy of Walter Capps." And I said, "Surely we are, and won't you help me reach out to folks?" And she did just that. And so thank you for that dose of inspiration to get this moving. A few other thank yous. This event really would not be taking place were it not for Associate Director Dusty Hosley. Dusty, where are you? A number of people have prematurely congratulated me on the success of this event, but to the degree that it exists at all and will be successful, this goes to Dusty. He has done so much work, as has our student assistant, Leilani Calkins, and our many volunteers. Thank you all. Thanks also to our donors who helped build the center in the first place and who continue to sustain it. We are very grateful. Also to the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center and Susan Derwin, who directs that center, for enabling us to be in this fantastic space and to host a most appropriate conversation here. Just a couple notes on upcoming events. In the winter, the CAP Center is delighted to host a few things of note. In January, we are hosting, in conjunction with Health Humanities and Legal Humanities, a scholar from Berkeley Law School, Kiara Bridges, who works at the intersection of critical race theory and reproductive justice. This is timely, it's urgent, it'll be a banger for sure. Please come out. February, Lerone Martin from Stanford University will be speaking to us about state surveillance of Black religion, another urgent topic, so please come out for that. Then in March, we have Phil Gorski from Yale University, a sociologist of religion, helping us better understand currents in contemporary Christian nationalism and related issues. Before I turn to introducing the panel, a land acknowledgement. As you know, we are on Chumash land, and we're not speaking in the past tense here, we're speaking in the present tense and in future tense. This is a Chumash place, or at least should be understood as such, and we wish to honor that. In this building, we're not only on Chumash land, we're with Chumash ancestors. This building hosts the repository for the Central Coast for ancestral human remains, and that is not a light topic, that's a serious topic. The university is now doing very good work to make good on the responsibility to house and repatriate those remains, and I'm proud to be part of that effort, and I hope that it continues and continues to be funded in important ways. So the gravity of this space is real in a way I think that Walter Capps himself would really appreciate and help us understand, for that matter. For this panel, The Value of Humanities, it is my pleasure to be able to introduce our Dean of the Humanities and Fine Arts here at UCSB, Dinah Berry. Dr. Dinah Berry is Professor of History and the Michael Douglas Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts here at UCSB. She came to Santa Barbara in August 2022 after serving as the Oliver H. Radke Regents Professor and Chair of the Department of History and Associate Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Texas. She is an internationally recognized scholar of the enslaved and a specialist on gender and slavery and Black women's history in the United States. She is the author and editor of 6 books and numerous scholarly articles. Dean Berry completed her BA, MA, and PhD, and some serious fast running, if I understand, in African American Studies and U.S. History at the University of California, Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Dinah Berry. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. He was making a side remark because I ran on the track team at UCLA, so that's what he meant by fast running. But it's wonderful to see everyone here. Thank you so much for coming out on this holiday to honor one of our esteemed former faculty members. I want to introduce our Executive Vice Chancellor, but before I do, I want to just say a few things about the humanities and the fine arts here on campus. I'm, as he mentioned, only been here for a year and a few months. And I just launched my vision for our future about a week ago. And one of the main pillars of our area of focus are the public arts and humanities. So I think it's very telling that we're here having those conversations as well. So David Marshall is Professor of English and Comparative Literature and the Executive Vice Chancellor here at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He has been the Executive Vice Chancellor since 2014. He previously served for 16 years as Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts and was the first Michael Douglas Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts. And he served in that role from 2005 to 2012. He was also the Executive Dean of the College of Letters the College of Letters and Science. Executive Vice Chancellor Marshall previously was a professor of English and Comparative Literature. I would say he still is, not was, he still is. And I would say that because he always is finding nice ways to help us with our word choice. our sentence structure and some of our memos that we write. He's like, I don't know if I would use this word. I'm like, oh, I've learned lots of words from David in the last year and a half. EVC Marshall is a professor of English and comparative literature, and he served there. He was at Yale University as well, where he taught from 1979 to 1997, and he also served as the director of the Whitney Humanities Center. From 2008 to 2022, he was a member of the board of directors of the National Humanities Alliance, including serving as president of the board of directors from 2014 to 2018. Please welcome Executive Vice Chancellor Marshall.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, and it's a wonderful occasion. There's a lot to say. Thinking back on my own story here, as Dino was mentioning, I actually was recruited to be Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts in 1998. And I'd spent almost 20 years in the world of the private university, and what attracted me here was, in part, the idea that the University of California was a great public research university. And I knew at the time that the Department of Religious Studies had a national reputation for its interdisciplinary and comparative approaches to the study of religion, its focus on American religion, and its public-facing and public-focused programs. And among these were the Vietnam and Voices of the Stranger courses that Walter Capps had created to bring students in the university into dialogue with voices and stories that were not being heard anywhere else at the time. Now, Walter Capps had died 9 or 10 months before I came to UC Santa Barbara, although I do remember that I was introduced to him downstairs in the elevator here in 1996 when I was visiting the IHC, but I never knew him. But in 1998, I soon found myself in conversation with Richard Hecht, who was then the department chair, and Clark Roof, who became department chair in 1999, as well as with many colleagues and many community members about how the campus could honor the legacy of Walter Capps. And the question from the beginning was not how to memorialize an esteemed colleague with the naming of a scholarship or a lecture series, for example. The question was how we could rise to the occasion, live up to the legacy of the work that Walter Capps represented. Now, what was remarkable about that time was how broad this conversation was about the legacy of Walter Capps. And it included the Capps family, who have always supported us while pushing us beyond our academic comfort zone to think in new ways about how we could bring academia to the public sphere and bring public issues to the academy. It included members of the Santa Barbara community, many of whom became very generous supporters. And in 2001, the department and La Casa de Maria sponsored a 3-day conference called Acts of Service, a conference on religion and public life, honoring the legacy of Walter H. Capps, at which Senator Bob Kerrey spoke. And the conversation included other public figures and public intellectuals, such as Representative David Price, Gary Wills, Martin Marty, Bill Moyers, E.J. Dionne, who came to campus to speak to us and to the community. Now, I want to pause here to acknowledge the incalculable contributions of Professor Wade Clark Roof, who served for 15 years as the founding director. There's inspiring music coming up as I'm remembering Clark Roof. Clark was the founding director of the Capps Center, and he served for a remarkable 15 years. He was the J.F. Rowney Professor of Religion and Society, and as many of you know, Clark was a major scholar of the sociology of religion. He also, by the way, oversaw an annual summer institute for the U.S. State Department that brought international scholars, civil servants, journalists, NGO leaders from over 80 countries Humanities to learn about religious pluralism and diversity in the United States. And I know Kathy Moore was involved with that, and I recall Lois speaking at that sometimes too. Like Walter Capps, Clark modeled engaged scholarship in the humanities and the humanistic social sciences that addressed crucial issues in society and public life. With the expert assistance of Leonard Wallach, who became the first associate director of the Capps Center in 2003, and support from our development colleagues, Nicole Clanfer and Leslie Gray, who are here today, Clark worked to implement a vision of a center that would include curricula, student internships in local nonprofits and government, and extensive public programming. And these events introduced students and the public to academics, public figures, policymakers, journalists, business leaders, all of whom enlarged and enriched a public sphere in which important questions about ethics, morality, and religion could be discussed and debated. And Clark and I spoke about the Capps Center at meetings around the country, and I still remember in 1999, we went to the University of Michigan to attend one of the first Imagining America gatherings, and UCSB became a founding member of that organization, which has championed public scholarship ever since. Now, I'm not here today to give a history of the Capps Center, but I want to think back to the origins. It was officially launched in 2002 and was called the Walter H. Capps Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life, but it was soon renamed the Walter H. Capps Center for the Study of Ethics, Religion, and Public Life to more fully reflect Walter Capps's vision and legacy, and to acknowledge that religion was part of a broader dialogue about the value and the values of the humanities in the public sphere. And in recalling the center's origins, I want to set the stage for a discussion about the public humanities and the importance of public investment in the humanities. Now, insofar as this is an origin story, I want to emphasize the unusual statewide and national resonance of Walter Capps at that time, and the crucial support that we received because of a broad investment in his vision, an investment that went far beyond the campus. In 2001, as we were discussing what a Capps Center would look like, we received $100,000 in seed funding from the UC Office of the President, and then in a highly unusual earmark, the United States Congress, with not only bipartisan support, but what's unthinkable now, unanimous support, allocated $500,000 to the Department of Education to support the center. Now, Clark Roof and I, along with Nicole Clanfer, attended a reception on Capitol Hill to recognize the award, and I have very vivid memories of this. Nancy Pelosi made moving comments, not only about Walter, but also about Lois, who she suggested had been brought to Congress through Walter. And I will always remember how the congressional staffers in the room started whispering to one another when Representative Steny Hoyer suddenly appeared on the podium with Nancy Pelosi and introduced her with effusive praise. Now, Pelosi had rather recently been elected the House Minority Whip in an upset over her longtime colleague. And this, it turned out, was the first time that they had appeared in public together, and this was seen as a dramatic reconciliation and display of unity. And the symbolism of that moment was very clear to the House insiders. And in fact, the Washington political publication, The Hill, actually had a column about this reception 2 days later with the headline, "Burying the Hatchet." And it described the event as a stunning, spontaneous moment. But it was clear that it was not entirely spontaneous. The occasion was not a coincidence. Walter Capps had brought together those two rivals in an embodiment of collegiality and civility. And as Lois Capps suggested when she was interviewed by The Hill, and I went back to do some archival research on this, this moment represented the legacy of Walter Capps. Now, in July of 2021, Chancellor Yang and I traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with Bill Ferris, who was then the chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we met with him in his office in the historic old post office building, which, believe it or not, was later sold by the U.S. government and turned into a Trump hotel. Bill Ferris was a folklorist who was also known for generating bipartisan support for the humanities, and he had actually been our Humanities and Fine Arts commencement speaker the preceding June. I remember that I had to go out and get a guitar so he could play a blues song as part of his commencement speech, and he invited Chancellor Yang and I to come to the NEH to talk to the senior staff about our humanities programs. And when we discussed our plans for the Capps Center, it became very clear that Walter Capps was known and deeply admired at the NEH, not only for his work at UCSB, but also for his service as chair of the California Council for the Humanities, president of the National Federation of State Humanities Councils, and for his NEH-supported Summer Institute for high school teachers and college teachers on topics that related to religion and public life in America. And our meeting at the NEH led to our submission of a proposal for an NEH challenge grant. And eventually, after peer review, it resulted in a $500,000 award in 2002. And we met and exceeded the requirement to raise $1.5 million in matching funds within the 5-year period, thanks to the extraordinary support of the Santa Barbara community. And this included donors who knew Walter and Lois, but also donors who just wanted to invest in the vision of ethical and civic engagement represented by the Capps Center. Now, I want to emphasize here this governmental support, and the National Endowment for the Humanities in particular, because arguments for public investment in the humanities and liberal education in this country, and the role of government in supporting the common good are more important today than ever. Now, I was president of the National Humanities Alliance, which advances national humanities policies in the area of research and education, preservation, and public programs in 2016 and 2017, when the newly inaugurated Donald Trump asked Congress to eliminate the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. And by the way, its funding ended up being increased thanks to bipartisan support. And at the time, I went back to read the explanations that the US Congress offered in 1965 in passing the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act that created the NEA and the NEH. It's interesting to think this was 1 year after Walter Capps became the second founding member of the new Department of Religious Studies at UC Santa Barbara. I think it was the first in a public university. And President Johnson in 1965, remember, who declared a war on poverty as part of his Great Society, argued for the need to attack the poverty of man's spirit. And it's really interesting to know how often that word spirit comes up in these discussions. Now, according to that National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act, and I'm going to read some sentences from that, while no government can call a great artist or scholar into existence, it is necessary and appropriate for the federal government to help create and sustain not only a climate encouraging freedom of thought, imagination, and inquiry, but also the material conditions facilitating the release of this creative talent. The world leadership which has come to the United States cannot rest solely upon superior power, wealth, and technology, but must be solidly founded upon worldwide respect and admiration for the nation's high qualities as a leader in the realm of ideas and of the spirit. And in the words of Congress, and I'll read one more quote, an advanced civilization must not limit its efforts to science and technology alone, but must give full value and support to the other great branches of scholarly and cultural activity in order to achieve a better understanding of the past, a better analysis of the present, and a better view of the future. And then, in words that I imagine Walter Capps hearing in 1965, democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens. Now, these words from 58 years ago have their origins in the principles that we've inherited from the founders of the American Republic. And by the way, I'm reminded of a description that Lois gave of Walter's decision to run for Congress in her memoir, Keeping Faith in Congress. And she wrote, "His head was filled with Jeffersonian ideals and the lessons of de Tocqueville, the subject of a summer course he had taught to high school students through the National Endowment for the Humanities." And she also noted that he hearkened back to what he had read of the founding fathers and envisioned himself returning to the classroom with a real story to tell after serving in Congress. The 1965 Act's argument that the federal government has an educational mission that includes support for cultural heritage and artistic and scholarly expression reminds us of what we have inherited from the American Enlightenment. Now, the 1780 Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which, by the way, was authored by John Adams, states that wisdom, knowledge, as well as virtue, and I think when they said virtue, they meant what we would say ethics, diffused generally among the body of the people, are necessary for the preservation of their rights and liberties. And as these depend upon spreading the opportunities and advantages of education in the various parts of the country and among the different orders of the people, it shall be the duty of legislatures and magistrates in all future periods of this Commonwealth to cherish the interests of literature and the sciences. And these words are actually echoed in the 1879 Constitution of the State of California, which declares a state-supported and autonomous University of California to be a public trust and affirms that a general diffusion of knowledge and intelligence is essential to the preservation of the rights and liberties of the people. Now, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, all the other thinkers who participated in that Enlightenment experiment of the American Republic argued that education was necessary to the preservation of the Constitution, democratic culture, and the rights and liberties of the people. And they focused on public education and liberal education, what we today would call the liberal arts and sciences and the humanities. And in 1790, in his first annual message to Congress, President Washington argued that the promotion of science and literature was necessary to the preservation of a free constitution. And in both his first and last addresses to Congress, Washington made many arguments for the importance of promoting what he called the flourishing state of the arts and sciences. In 1778, in an oration that was delivered on the second anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the South Carolinian statesman and historian David Ramsay rhapsodically predicted that the new republic and the arts and sciences would flourish together, and that the arts and sciences will be cultivated, extended, and improved in independent America. And he was echoing the philosopher David Hume, I think, who asserted that it is impossible for the arts and sciences to arise at first among any people unless the people enjoy the blessing of a free government. And Ramsay writes, "Our free governments are the proper nurturers of rhetoric, criticism, and the arts, which are founded on the philosophy of the human mind." And he anticipates that the free governments of America will produce poets, orators, critics, and historians equal to the most celebrated of the ancient commonwealths of Greece and Italy. Extrapolating this philosophy of the human mind from Hume and Shaftesbury and Addison, 18th century American writers argue for the improvement of the mind, and Ramsay declares that eloquence is the child of a free state because arguments about laws and policies are enforced by the art of persuasion. The rising patriot, he writes, therefore, who wishes the happiness of his country will cultivate the art of public speaking. And contrasting British government, which tended to crush the exertions of the human mind, he said, with American government in which all conspire to fan the sparks of genius in every breast, Ramsey anticipates what Samuel Harrison Smith describes in a wonderful phrase, the collision of mind with mind, in his discussion of why liberal education is best suited for a Republican form of government that must depend upon the general diffusion of knowledge and the capacity to think and speak correctly. And this is finally an argument about the relation between what we would today call democracy and what we would today call the humanities. It is also, in some ways, a good description of a liberal arts education in which the improvement of the mind and the effort to fan the sparks of genius in every breast to increase knowledge and the capacity to think and to speak take place in a community founded on dialogue, argument, and this collision of mind with mind. Now, I'm reminded here of the statement that Walter Capps often quoted from John Dewey, democracy begins in conversation. The humanities are fundamental to our rights and liberties. The humanities are central to our democratic institutions because they can teach us how to think, how to talk to each other, how to listen to each other, how to argue with each other without rending the fabric of our community. And Walter Capps understood that the humanities were central to this conversation because they taught people how to tell their own stories and how to listen to the stories of others. Now, today, I fear that even Walter Capps, as both a professor of religious studies and as a member of Congress, would be challenged in our current moment when the national political dialogue seems paralyzed and when horrific events in the Middle East have led to a breakdown of community on many college campuses. Yet, more than ever, we need to learn from Walter Capps's lessons about democratic institutions and his insights into our need to move beyond silence, trauma, and division to create the dialogue and the community in which we can listen to each other and create a space in which to hear the voice of the other. This is also what the humanities can teach us. So I look forward to more conversations that I think will continue many of these themes. Thank you. So we have a great panel to begin today. We've brought together some very important national humanities leaders who have special expertise in state humanities councils and who also have a good knowledge, as you'll hear, of the contributions that Walter Capps made. Unfortunately, James Quay, who's the former executive director of the California Council for the Humanities, had a family emergency and can't be with us, but he sent his paper, which I believe Ralph will read. And so we're going to hear from Ralph Lewin, executive director of the Peter E. Haas Jr. Family Fund and former president and CEO of the California Council for the Humanities, and Phoebe Stein, president of the Federation of the State Humanities Councils. And you have their bio, so I'm not going to say more than that. So we'll begin with their talks, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions after that. So thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Great to see everybody here on such a beautiful day. Jim Quay can't be here, and he's very sorry about that. I had a chance to talk with him. And I'm sorry for it for a number of reasons, one of which he began his career in radio, and he has such a beautiful radio voice. But he also has a beautiful heart and a beautiful mind that I think you'll feel as I read this. I retired from the California Council for the Humanities more than 15 years ago. So I think any reflections on the current state of the public humanities are best left to Phoebe and Ralph. But as the elder member of the panel, I'd like to offer some background and history of the public humanities and their value that I hope will be helpful. You could make the case that the public humanities began when the pre-Socratic philosophers first spoke in Greek agoras 2.5 millennia ago. But institutionally, the public humanities are a recent phenomenon. 4 years after its own creation in 1965, the National Endowment for the Humanities created its Division of Public Programs. 2 years later, NEH, not quite as ceremonial as the NEH provided funds for experimental humanities councils in 6 states. In 1977, the Federation of State Humanities Councils was formed, and by then, there were humanities councils in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and 4 American territories. That the intended audience for these humanities councils was the public was demonstrated by the mandated structure of the board. Half were academics and half were public members. When reviewing proposals, academic members would scrutinize the humanities content and the participating scholars. Is the project intellectually coherent? Are the participating scholars appropriate? The public members would scrutinize the project's structure and appeal. Who will come? Why should they come? I found this blend of state council boards quite wonderful, though. Sometimes it could feel a little bit like introducing people from foreign countries at the United Nations. I particularly enjoyed when an academic member would take me aside and say, you know, these public members are really quite intelligent. Or a public member would take me aside and say, you know, these academic members, they're really quite approachable. These asides suggest that the board members came from worlds that didn't often associate with one another. But there were times when I also felt there was a disassociation between the academics and the public humanities. Here's an example. When the Federation of Humanities Councils had its annual conference in San Francisco in 2005, I was asked to comment on a paper about a conference entitled The Aspen Summit on Rethinking the Public Humanities that had been held the previous year. I discovered the scholar writing the paper had called the conference the Aspen Summit on Rethinking the Humanities. I think his dropping public from the title was a telling omission. For most of the paper, the author talked about the humanities, and when he finally got around to talking about the public humanities, it was clear that what he meant by the public humanities was the academic humanities in public spaces. Are the public humanities simply the academic humanities in public spaces? This is a natural assumption. Many earlier directors of humanities councils began their careers on campuses, and we thought our work as bringing the humanities from the campus to the public, from the towers to the trenches, as we used to say. The public humanities then, and now, use the principal vehicle of academic humanities, a lecture followed by questions from the audience. Common formats used in public humanities projects derive from the lecture, museum exhibits, a kind of visual lecture, for example, or documentary films, also a kind of lecture. On the other hand, it didn't take long to realize that humanities projects in public spaces had to be a great deal more interactive, more personal, more participatory than the usual classroom lecture. In public formats, we had to ensure there was a connection with and full participation of the audience. Otherwise, the public would not come. Public humanities projects are electives, after all, not required courses. Let me say that emphasizing personal connection and audience participation are not exclusive features of public humanities projects, but they are championed by the academic humanities as well. But they are essential to the public humanities. I'll close this portion of my presentation by describing the public humanities format that was born in state council practice rather than adapted from the academy. It's called the Chautauqua. A Chautauqua performance has 3 parts. For the first half hour, a humanities scholar speaks to the audience in a persona of a historical personage, wearing the appropriate dress and using first-person testimony like diaries or letters if possible. In the second, he or she answers questions from the audience as the historical person would have answered them. In the third half hour, he or she offers comments to and answers questions from the audience about the person they portrayed. So one of the first most accomplished practitioners was Clay Jenkinson, who portrayed Thomas Jefferson. As Jefferson, he offers his opinions and accomplishments. Inevitably, in the second half hour, he is asked about Sally Hemings. He denies all allegations, as Jefferson did all his life. In the third half hour, however, Clay cites the evidence we now have regarding Jefferson's relationship with Miss Hemings. The historical figure has his say, but it's not the final say. In Chautauqua, the text becomes a person, the interaction personal as well as critical. And I can tell you, it's a powerful experience. I remember choking up when telling a scholar portraying Henry David Thoreau how grateful I was for his essay on civil disobedience. Not every public project can offer this powerful and personal an experience, but I offer it as a quintessential example of what public humanities projects seek to achieve. Now I'd like to turn to the question of the value of the humanities. In 1969, I read an essay by literary critic George Steiner entitled "To Civilize Our Gentlemen." Please forgive the antique language. In that essay, Steiner wrote, "I find myself unable to assert confidently that the humanities humanize. Indeed, I go further. It is at least conceivable that the focusing of consciousness on a written text, which is the substance of our training and pursuit, diminishes the sharpness and readiness of our actual moral response." He posited a controversial figure, the literate Nazi who destroys Jewish lives during the day and reads his Goethe at night. At the time, I was working in central Harlem as a conscientious objector, anguished by my country's war in Vietnam and hoping to become an English professor. Steiner's challenge haunted me. Since then, I've experienced academic humanities courses and contributed to public humanities projects that I hope and believe were humanizing. But the most powerful answer to Steiner I have ever encountered was that of Walter Capps and his Vietnam class. I first met Walter in late 1982, a few months after The Unfinished War, Vietnam and the American Conscience, was published. I was a humanities producer for California Public Radio, and I had a particular interest in this book and its author. Our interview came just weeks after the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I'd been powerfully moved by the reading of the names, which was part of the dedication. During our interview, Walter told me about the class he was teaching at UCSB in the Religious Studies department. He told me that he had asked veterans, journalists, nurses, and politicians to bear witness to their experience in Vietnam. I asked him if he had ever invited a protester or a conscientious objector to speak to the class, and he paused before saying, no, he hadn't. 6 months later, through a series of small miracles, I was hired as executive director of the California Council for the Humanities, and as it happened, Walter Capps was the incoming chair. It was the beginning of our close professional association. In 1985, he invited me to tell my story to his class, the story of how I became a conscientious objector to that war. Telling my story to his class was an experience I will never forget, one repeated in following years. I came to love and admire Walter, not because he was an inspirational teacher and a renowned scholar of the humanities. I envy you who have had the pleasure of knowing him in those roles. But what I loved and admired about Walter was that he was a true practitioner of the humanities. By that, I don't mean that he was humane or humanistic, though he certainly was both, but to practice the humanities is to seek out stories about the lives of others, living, dead, fictional. To practice the humanities is to talk with others about those lives and the way their stories are told or not told. To practice the humanities is to ask what these lives tell us about what it means to be human, what they mean to us today. Walter's course modeled this practice, and in doing so answers Steiner's challenge. He enabled them to hear the cry in the streets and not just the cry in the text. Walter's course was not formally a public humanities project. It was held on campus, this campus. But through that course and its sequel, Voices of the Stranger, Walter brought people and their stories from the margins of society and into the very heart of the university. His students did not meet Vietnam veterans or disabled people as objects of study but as human beings to be heard, talked to, encountered, and ultimately cared about. I think the genesis of the course tells you a lot about Walter and about his practice of the humanities. Walter was a fellow at the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, and in 1977 became its program director. The center, which had hosted many workshops on the Vietnam War while it raged, decided that it should do one last workshop on the war, now that the war was over. Walter looked down the list of prospective invitees and noticed that the list included not a single veteran of the war. This was in 1977, barely 2 years after the war's ignominious end. Sorry. And no one, not one, was talking or listening to Vietnam veterans. Walter started calling around and located Shad Me Shad. And Shad, who'd started the first Vietnam Vet Center by going down to the Santa Monica Pier and approaching men who had a certain look in their eyes, which identified them as veterans, Walter persuaded Shad and another veteran, Frederick Downs Jr., to come to the workshop. For most of the first day, the articulate policy experts talked and talked about the war. The two veterans were silent. Walter tried to draw them out, but it was difficult. Finally, during a break, they told Walter that they couldn't talk about the war the way everyone else was. "That's okay," Walter said. "Tell it in your own way." After the break, Fred Downs began by driving the hook at the end of his right arm down onto the polished conference table and declaring, "I can't talk about the friggin' war this way." He then told the startled audience about the Vietnam War he had experienced. What Walter heard that day was so searing that he knew that the war was not finished, not in any way that was important to the soul of the country. So he decided to teach what became simply called the Vietnam class, and decided that the main substance of the course would not be lectures, but first-person testimony of people who had participated in the war. The university and its department were not immediately supportive, but in 1979, he was allowed to offer the class as an experiment. The response, as we know, was stunning. By the time I spoke before his class in 1985, the course had to be offered in Campbell Hall, which seats nearly 900 students. A 1984 poll had found only 44% of incoming students thought developing a meaningful philosophy of life was a worthy goal, while 70% thought being very well off financially was important, a reversal of the results from the 1968 poll. Yet there they were, 800 plus students. I guarantee you, no student ever took Walter's class because she thought it would help her make more money. By their own testimony, students had their lives changed by Walter's class. And I would claim, to use Steiner's term, they were humanized. I offer both the Chautauqua and Walter's Vietnam course to you not as models. All humanities courses and public humanities projects can follow, but as, to my mind, the most powerful example of how the humanities can humanize by inviting us, by enabling us to exercise our moral imaginations. I want to close with 3 short snapshots that illustrate Walter's effect on people and then end with a poem. Oh, Todd, I'm going to need your help with this. Can you make kind of a tuba sound when I point to you? This is on you, sorry. Ready? While he was chair, and I was, yeah, like that. While I was chair and I was executive director of the California Council for the Humanities, we would have a weekly phone call. One day I called when Walter wasn't home and heard something unexpected. "Hello, this is Walter Capps." It was Walter playing the tuba. "I can't come to the phone right now." Tuba sound. "But leave a message and I'll call you back." Thank you, Todd. On my flight home From Walter's memorial service, a flight attendant saw the poem I had written on the seat next to me and asked, "Is that for Walter?" "Not Congressman Capps, not Professor Capps, Walter." "Yes," I said. "Walter's the only person I've ever voted for," she said. "You know, not against the other guy, but really for." "Did you know him personally?" I nodded. "I'm really sorry, really sorry." Later that day, driving home from San Francisco Airport, I approach a stoplight and I see a middle-aged guy on the median strip with a sign, "Vietnam vet, will work for food, please help." This time, I don't put on my "I don't see you" face and stare out the windshield. I pull out a couple of bucks and offer it to him. "Good luck, brother," I say. The guy's fill, my eyes fill. Now the car behind me offers him something. Maybe the car behind him. "That's for you, Walter." I thought, "That's for you." That, I would submit, is an example of practicing the humanities. In the days following Walter's death, I could not bear to write a poem about Walter, which I felt would turn him into an object. So I wrote a poem to Walter. I have altered it slightly for today to honor and connect with his presence, a presence I still feel. And here's the poem. I and Thou, to Walter Capps. Walter, it's me, Jim. I wish I could hear you say, "Hey, Jim," the way you always did. Walt, so many of us wish we could hear you again. It's dark, it's a dark time, and we miss that glow that always surrounds you. You'd walk into a room and everyone just glad to see you. You didn't have to say a word. That would be honor enough to shine the way you did, make people a little better by your very presence. But you did more. You took your light into dark places, places we wanted to forget, hiding places for the people we wanted to forget, and the war we wanted to forget, places that reeked of death and anger and deep despair. You brought a lot of people back with you, students wondering what their books were for, veterans wondering why they were still alive, AIDS victims wondering what their dying could possibly mean. You heard the voices of the stranger, Walt, and you made it possible for us to hear them and showed us that there are no strangers, only neighbors, neighbors we hear or choose not to hear. You shared your lectern with so many of us and gave us a chance to find our voices, and now we are suddenly all the voice you have. And today, you have made us neighbors again, and we are here celebrating you, but also grieving for you, and the loss of your good heart and your great soul. Many years ago, in my job interview, remember, you asked me, "Do you have any heroes?" Now, how like you is that question? Open, inviting, quietly powerful. When I'd ask it in all my interviews, I would think of you. That day, I answered Martin Buber. I haven't been asked since, but Walter, if I'm ever asked again if I have any heroes, I'll answer Walter Capps. You, Walter, you. Thank you. All right, that was my Chautauqua performance. I am no longer Jim Quay. I am Ralph Lewin. Thanks for bearing with me. Jim's, as you'll hear, is a great friend and mentor and part of that lineage, Walter Capps, Jim. I feel so honored to be a part of. So here's my story. To begin with, let me tell you a story of how I met Walter Capps. It starts when I moved in the second grade to September Street in a neighborhood called Claremont in San Diego. Claremont was one of those neighborhoods built in the 50s to house people working in the military industry, places like Lockheed Martin, Convair, and General Dynamics. On and around the corner from September Street lived many of my buddies, Georgie, Alex, Cindy, Bodes, Rod, Michael. We were a gang of rascals who would spend our days building forts in the canyons, playing hide and go seek among cars in the driveways, and roller derby in the cul-de-sacs. Most of our parents in the neighborhood were former military veterans of World War II, Korea, the Vietnam War. But like most of America, we didn't talk about the war experiences. It was a silence that hovered over where we lived, that maybe exploded at the neighborhood 4th of July party when someone had too much to drink, or could be felt in a deeper, unsettled existence at the dinner table. Well, unlike most of my high school graduating class, I decided to leave San Diego for Santa Barbara, one paradise for another. Among the first people I met at UCSB was Todd Capps, smart, hilarious, an incredible musician and artist, a powerful surfer. He was one of those people you hope your kids meet when they go to college. Todd soon introduced me to his family, his amazing sisters, Lisa and Laura, his wonderful mom, Lois, and of course, Walter. And this was in 1985. And I remember meeting Walter, and after talking for a while, playing some basketball, I remember his impossible to defend hook shot, maybe listening to him play tuba for a minute. You don't have to do it this time. He might have said, "Hey, Ralph, did you hear that one about Ole and Lars? The one about them taking the train?" I probably said, "No, Mr. Capps, I hadn't." "Well, they were taking the train and brought along some bananas for lunch. Just as they began to peel them, the train entered a long, dark tunnel. Ole asked excitedly, 'Hey, Lars, did you eat your banana yet?' Lars said, 'No.' 'Well, don't do it. I just took a bite and went blind.'" Walter would tell those kind of jokes, and he'd just kind of chuckle, and he'd just kind of look at you, kind of like, "Hey, Ralph, did you get it?" Well, I soon after learned about that class that Walter taught, the class where he brought in all kinds of people to talk about the thing that couldn't be talked about on September Street. He pulled back the curtains to reveal that our parents, sorry, I'm just laughing about the banana joke. That's just him. He pulled back the curtains to reveal what our parents, our teachers, our friends, our society wouldn't talk about. The Vietnam War, filled with its history, stories, the humanity, the inhumanity, the moral decisions that shaped the country we inherited in ways we didn't understand. He created not just a safe space, but a brave space, a space where veterans like Shad and Bob Carey and conscientious objectors like Jim Quay could tell their stories alongside one another. I remember walking to Campbell Hall, or I was probably skateboarding, for the first day of class, and kept asking myself, why would 800 students sign up for a religious studies class? It made no sense to me. But I came back to 3 reasons. One, authenticity. So we recognize the authenticity of the stories that were before us. 2, relevance. The stories really mattered to our lives and to our families' lives and to the direction of our country. And then trust. You walk into Campbell Hall and you just had this sense that we as students had the trust of those presenting their stories to try and help them make sense of those stories. So there's a whole panel devoted to the class tomorrow, so I'm not going to talk more about the class, just to say that it had a profound impact on me and helped me understand the power of stories, the power of listening, and the power of silence. After graduating from UCSB, I waited tables, traveled, went back to school, and eventually in 1992 landed a job interview with the California Council for the Humanities. I remember it was in a boardroom in San Diego, and who was sitting across from me but Jim Quay, whose story about being a conscientious objector had moved me. And guess which question Jim asked? That's right. "Ralph, do you have any heroes?" Well, somehow I answered it, I got the job, and Jim not only became a boss, but a mentor in life. How lucky. Fast forward to 2012, I'd become CEO of the California Council for the Humanities, and we did a number of statewide projects, one called Searching for Democracy, which had people in standing room only spaces from Fresno to San Francisco talking about the meaning of democracy, the question about what role civility plays in democracy. Everybody was very concerned about the direction of our democracy in 2012. Kind of seems quaint now, doesn't it? And then my last project as CEO of the California Council for the Humanities was in 2014. It was called War Comes Home, which explores what it means to come home from war and how we could build bridges of understanding between those who served and those who had not. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? We had over 850 events across California, reaching about 2 million people, as communities were brought together with veterans and their families, and writers and philosophers and historians and local libraries and community centers and homes to think about the aftermath of war, particularly in light of 12 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had a lot of events, and one was an exhibition called War, Inc. It was an exhibition unlike anything else I had seen, talking with veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq about their tattoos, what they meant and what it was to experience war and come home from war. The exhibition went on to be featured in Newsweek magazine, Washington Post, and received the Schwartz Prize for Public Humanities Excellence. Rather than try and explain it, I'd love to play a short clip, and I'm not quite sure how to do that. So Dusty, maybe you can help me.
I served in Kyrgyzstan, Iraq, Kuwait, South Korea.
Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and I served in Iraq.
I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, and I served in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Chances for people to talk about Iraq or Afghanistan, but I don't think there have been a lot of chances for veterans themselves to talk about what those experiences were in their own voice in a way that doesn't have a politically charged message.
People always want to know when they ask you about like your experiences and stuff like that. I started to think of tattoos as a way to tell the stories. So I got a soldier's cross tattooed on my back for my friends that died because I carried the burden of survivor's guilt.
It's a tribute to those that are no longer here, but it also serves as a reminder to maintain my humanity and the experiences that I've been through, where I am now, and how that's going to shape who I become in the future.
I hadn't really accepted that I had fully come home. Because I knew men who died. And there's a part of me that died over there.
I feel really alone in this world. I feel like, no one understands and no one gets it. And that's okay, I can deal with that.
I feel kind of lost, like it's like when all of those things that are really important to you all of a sudden disappear. When your path isn't like exactly in front of you like it has been for so many years, then it's easy just to get really lost and kind of question who you are and why you're doing anything anymore.
It helps the civilian world kind of understand a little bit more about us, that we have thought processes behind our tattoos, behind what we do.
The clouds are like the angel rays coming down, and that's my feet. They're my Chuck Taylors with wings, so it's like my feet going to heaven. Every day is hard, but kind of just accepted it and just try to make the best of what I got. I'm not dead, I'm always a glass is half full kind of person, so.
We're not all crazy. Some of us are hopeless romantics. Just most of us are generally just funny guys and ridiculously good looking.
Yeah, people are very quick to judge when they hear military tattoos, which is a shame, in my opinion.
Opening communication between veterans and civilians, that communication's hard. I'm starting to realize that it's an important thing to do.
I feel like there might be one other veteran out there who might understand me. And if that makes them feel not so alone, then this whole project's worth it.
And the only sense of family I've ever felt was when I was in the Navy. And it's the most powerful feeling I've ever felt. I feel like I belong.
I smiled a lot today. I don't usually smile a lot. It made me pretty happy, and I'm not usually very happy. I felt a little more beautiful than I normally ever feel. I feel like a disgusting person most of the time. Today kind of took all that away from me. It really meant a lot to me. I couldn't have asked for a better day.
So, that project, I don't think, would have happened without the kind of groundwork that Walter had done and that people like Shad had done, who actually advised us as we did the War Comes Home project. But authenticity, relevance, trust, all represented there. So a final word about the humanities. David asked me to talk about the state of the public humanities. As a head of the Family Foundation now for the past 4 years, I'm not as engaged in the humanities as I once was, but I do have a few thoughts. So in some ways, we're living in very dark times for the humanities. The humanities are under attack with universities cutting departments, faculty, student enrollments down. We see reactionary and authoritarian forces seeking to ban ideas, books, and restricting and censoring humanities discourse at every level. Make no mistake, this is serious and calls on each of us to unapologetically make a strong case for the role that the humanities play in our public life. At the same time, we could be at the cusp of a golden age. The humanities have been democratized. Access to an interview with Toni Morrison, an analysis of Shakespeare's sonnets, or a discussion about the ethics of war are available to most people in a way that they haven't been available in human history. This is both exciting and daunting. In a world where we will continue to struggle with our understanding of truth and lies, love and hate, liberty and captivity, and yes, war and peace, the humanities remain vital and important to us as a society. It's up to us to build the trust and engage authentically in a way that people see as relevant to their lives. Walter Capps provides us with one pathway to do this, and the ripple effect on our society has been profound. I guess one question that remains for us in view of the work of Walter Capps is, what are we doing to foster a public conversation rooted in the humanities, and how can we do it better? Thank you.
Unlike the rest of the people on this panel, and many of the people here in the audience, I never met Walter Capps, and I am certain that I am poorer in spirit and mind for that. But I have a strong institutional memory of Walter Capps as a former board member at California Humanities, and as a former board member and board chair at my nonprofit, the Federation of State Humanities Councils. We're the membership organization for the nation's state and jurisdictional humanities councils. I have learned a lot about Walter Capps, and most what I know about Walter Capps from Jim Quay's beautiful booklet, I'm not sure if you all know of this booklet, which Jim calls an album, that he published when he was executive director of California Humanities. I brought a copy with me. This publication not only records Jim's memories, but those of Walter Kapp's family and friends. The booklet also explains why the Federation chose to establish the annual Walter H. Kapp's Lecture as the centerpiece of our National Humanities Conference. But though my experience of Walter Kapp's, the scholar, the public humanist, the husband, the father, and public servant, has been secondhand, I do feel that I have a personal connection to, if I may, Walter. The Kapp's Lecture, and thus Walter Kapp's, have always been a part of my professional life. In 1999, the same year that the Federation established the Walter Kapp's Lecture to honor him, just 2 years after his untimely death, I stumbled quite literally into a job at Illinois Humanities Council. As Kapp's believed in the power of stories, I'll share mine very briefly. In 1999, I was 1 year out of graduate school at Loyola University Chicago with a newly minted PhD in English looking for a tenure-track job. I read about the Chicago Humanities Festival in our local weekly Chicago Reader. I don't know if you remember local paper weeklies. And I went to go hear both Sandra Cisneros and N. Scott Momaday read. I think the price to get in was $3. I immediately started teaching Cisneros' The House on Mango Street in my Composition 101 classes at Loyola and DePaul. And that summer, I called the Chicago Humanities Festival asking if they had any internships, only to be told that they didn't, but I should call Christina Velitis at the Illinois Humanities Council. I applied to be a summer intern in 1999, and I stayed for 8 wonderful years. I attended my first National Humanities Conference and my first Kapp's Lecture in 2000, just a year after it was established. I'm sorry to say I don't remember what Congressman David Skaggs had to say, but subsequent lectures are bright in my memory. Every Kapp's lecture embodies Walter Kapp's demonstrated commitment to the power of the humanities to transform individual and community life. With the annual Kapp's Lecture, the Federation's intention is to highlight, endorse, and offer as a model the qualities that Walter brought to teaching, his public service, and his day-to-day interactions. A belief in the value of dialogue, an ability to evoke and create meaning through the exchange of stories, a belief in the power of the telling of personal stories to create empathetic understanding and desire to act, a commitment to inclusion of all voices, and importantly, the promotion of civility in public and private life. In establishing the Kapp's Lecture, the Federation wanted to make available presentations that encourage public and private commitment to the creation of a more humane and enlightened society. Since I left Illinois Humanities, I have spent the entirety of my career in the Humanities Council community as executive director at Maryland Humanities and now president of the Federation. But for many years before I had this job, I was part of selecting the Kapp's Lecture, so I think about the sustaining Walter Kapp's legacy every year. It is not a job that I take lightly, and it is among my favorite projects of each year. So I'll offer some highlights. I had the honor and pleasure of introducing author Azar Nafisi when she gave the Kapp's Lecture in 2010. And a few years later, when I sat on the committee for the conference in Birmingham, Alabama, I invited Freeman Hrabowski to give the Kapp's Lecture, one of my mentors at Maryland Humanities Council. Hrabowski was from Birmingham and a self-proclaimed math nerd of about 8 or 10 years old when he participated in Dr. Martin Luther King's Children's March and served jail time as a child after being spit on by Bull Connor. In my memory, that talk stunned the Kapp's Lecture audience into silence and then into thunderous applause. In 2021, during COVID, our second all-virtual National Humanities Conference, I asked Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha to give the Kapp's Lecture. You may remember she was the pediatrician whose research helped detect the lead poisoning in the local water in her patients, in her young patients. And ultimately, her research led to reversing the water flow in the river in Flint, Michigan to remove the lead. And just a couple of weeks ago, at the 2023 National Humanities Conference in Indianapolis, before an audience of around 600 people, the 25th CAPS lecture was held. This was a conversation between Alelia Bundles, journalist, author, and great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, and Professor Tyrone McKinley Freeman. These two esteemed humanists connected their work to our everyday lives and the ongoing fight for justice, drawing on their personal experiences and focusing on Black philanthropy in America. The event was held in the Madam C.J. Walker Center in Indianapolis, a grand old theater that once denied Madam C.J. Walker entry unless she were to pay 3 times the price a white person paid to enter. She later bought that building. This connection between the personal and the civic, the voices and stories that help us understand not only what it means to be human, but what it means to live together on this planet as humans, that for me is Walter Kapps's legacy 25 years later. Please know that his legacy is strong at the Federation. We honor his life's work all year as we plan the conference and the Cornerstone CAPS lecture. So, what does this all have to do with the value of the humanities today, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about? As both Ralph and Jim emphasized, Walter Kapps used firsthand stories as a way to explore the humanities as the texts that were worthy of time and deep engagement. I want to offer some examples of recent and ongoing work by humanities councils across the nation that embody Walter Kapp's work as a humanities practitioner. I love that Jim Quay used that word. That focus on stories, healing, change, and connection. For me, this is why the humanities are a powerful tool for directly addressing our challenges, our conflicts, our pain, our incalculable loss that is so resonant in these times. In September, 2 Pacific Island Humanities Councils, Humanities Guahan and Northern Mariana Humanities Councils, presented a conference called Reimagining the Marianas. This was an evening that celebrated self-reflection, storytelling, exploration, and creating meaningful social change through performance and conversation. Importantly, the program featured food, powerful performances by Indigenous cultural experts and artists, and a meaningful discussion about cultural identity, resilience, and healing. The goal was to create an inclusive and welcoming space in the Pacific where participants could think critically and discuss the values and choices that shape us as a community, or shape them as a community, to reimagine a Marianas that is more just and inclusive and sustainable. Also in September of this year, the South Dakota Humanities Council sponsored a storytelling contest for veterans that culminated with an awards ceremony at their South Dakota Humanities Book Festival. Army veteran and festival author Brian Turner announced the winners and held a workshop specifically for the veterans. During an interview prior to his appearance at the 2017 festival, National Book Award winning author Tim O'Brien said, "Writing about war helps writers and readers find meaning in what happened." And this is a Tim O'Brien quote. "The word war is such an abstraction. It's almost meaningless as a word. It's not until it's something specific that it takes on any meaning. And often that's through a story." This program, too, feels like a direct legacy of Walter Kapp's. As we look towards the next generation of humanities practitioners, I also see Walter Kapp's influence on an Arkansas Humanities Council program called Next Generation Humanities. Held in downtown Little Rock this coming March, you can attend. This is a first-of-its-kind conference to bridge the gap between the humanities education and careers of young professionals. This is an intergenerational conference that's going to bring together the next generation of humanities scholars ages 17 through 22, I think, with experienced professionals in the humanities fields. They're going to have resume workshops and mock interviews and free professional headshots and even a clothing closet for folks to have professional clothes. I want to close with 2 examples of what the humanities can do in the most dire of circumstances. And I do what Ralph says about the darkness of this moment does resonate with me. I was in Mississippi last week, as all of you know, I think currently the poorest state in our nation, and I saw the humanities in action. So I'll close with this. First, I attended at Jackson State University. They hosted the 50th anniversary of the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, first funded by NEH in 1973. The events featured 3 days of sessions and, most importantly, conversations among Black women writers. Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, Charlene Hunter Galt, and Margaret Walker graced the stage in 1973. 50 years later, just last week, Alice Walker was there in person, as was Charlene Hunter Galt, and Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez via Zoom due to health issues. Amani Perry, Nicole Hannah-Jones, and Jackson, Mississippi's own Angie Thomas spoke this year, and the conference drew more than 600 people. There were no rental cars anywhere that you could find. Personal stories, history, hard truths, and calls to action about book bans, continued racial violence, and survival filled the auditoriums. I had the honor of visiting 2 other humanities projects in Mississippi, both with Mississippi Humanities Council and NEH, and these really resonated with me as I was thinking about Walter Capps recently. I was confused by the first visit initially, which was to the Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, the only medical research center and school in the area. I looked at my agenda, I was due there, I didn't know what we were doing there. So I just sat and listened. We met with the director of ethics there, who had been called out of retirement in 2011 when a construction crew broke ground on a new building for the medical center and found human remains. What they discovered was a 12-acre, neatly planned, unsegregated graveyard for the mental hospital that had been there in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There are more than 6,000 graves in 12 acres, most in pine boxes, but with no names. With the support of the state, which is unprecedented, the state of Mississippi gave them $3 million for this project, and support from NEH, they have put together a team of scientists, humanists, to exhume, identify, and lay to rest these remains in a mausoleum nearby. There are archaeologists, philosophers, ethicists, historians on this team, and they are working closely with the descendants. This is a project truly where the humanities are truly restoring humanity to the mentally ill and forgotten citizens of Mississippi. Finally, I made a visit to Rolling Fork, Mississippi in the Delta, the birthplace of, anybody know? Blues musician, Muddy Waters. You may remember, or you may not, that a deadly tornado ripped through Rolling Fork last March. The population before the storm was about 2,000 people, I believe. Soon after the tornado hit, Mississippi Humanities and a local blues historian learned that the town welcome center, the museum that had some incredible Muddy Waters artifacts, including apparently a vinyl LP from Rolling Stones that was signed by all the Rolling Stones to Muddy Waters, and all the town signage had been destroyed. They were sensitive that lives had been lost, but they asked if getting these signs restored was a priority. They asked the mayor and the local heritage folks, and they said yes, it was. So I figured 8 months after the tornado, and with FEMA and lots of other help, the town would have recovered. What I saw shocked me. Parts of houses were literally hanging from trees, stripped of bark. The library was still closed, and the bathroom I used in the building, in the library, was still stripped of its walls and its flooring. The cupola on the town hall was still entirely ripped off. But in the grass, beside the trailers that now house the town hall, on a sunny day, we unveiled the Muddy Waters Heritage sign and the Heritage Area sign for Rolling Fork. What I love is that the historian also took the opportunity to update the text on the signs with this opportunity and make them more historically accurate. Before the unveiling, proud residents gave us a tour, a windshield tour in their car, pointing out all that had been lost and all that would not return, telling their stories. This made me rethink what makes a community. This was a town still very much destroyed. I didn't see anyone, very few people walking on the streets. Well, there are no sidewalks. You might think that no one lived there, but the stories and these historical markers and the homemade sack lunches that we carried home told me that we had experienced the heart of this community of Rolling Fork. And I'd like to think that Walter Capps would smile his very bright smile at that particular moment. Thank you.
So thank you for those really rich talks, which had a lot of connections. We have time for questions, comments from the audience, and I guess that because this is being taped, we want people to use the microphone. So I'll ask my colleagues here to take these, and I will be glad to call on people. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, so my question is to Ralph with regard to the Chautauqua methodology and the world within which we live now where people interact quite regularly with machines. What would Walter say?
I don't know. And on the one hand, I think it's exciting. The idea that we could interact with, say, someone who had fought on the front lines in World War II, or World War I, or the Revolutionary War, and hear their story. That's amazing. That's amazing. But then I guess there's also a question about, what do I gain when I hear directly from Shad Meshad about his story? And I see in his eyes and feel in his heart that story. I'm not sure, and I wonder. You're living in this world, Daniel, more than I am. I wonder at what point will technology evolve to where there isn't a difference? Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, why don't we get more questions in the mix, unless Phoebe wanted to say something about that. So there was a question back here. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. This is more of a response to all the talks. Thank you, everyone who spoke. It was so inspiring and aspirational, and I feel so galvanized. Is that right? I wasn't lucky enough to have Walter Capps as a teacher. I have many friends who have, and every single one of them have said how transformative he was and how he changed their lives. And even coming up on the elevator to this talk, women in front here, transformative. But I am very lucky to know the Capps family personally, and I tear up because clearly Walter's spirit shines through every one of them, and they inspire me every day. And I teared up through this. It doesn't take much for me, but I did, and I just feel so inspired, and I just want to thank everyone and to share my love for the Capps family. And to thank all of you today. This is really special. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, please. Here's the...
This is pretty overwhelming. I'm sitting here with the Capps family. I miss Lisa. I used to sleep in her room for 20 years, even after she left. On a lighter note, that day at Montecito, I ended up meeting Walter through the White House. They had called, I don't know, Walter could call probably anybody in the world, but somehow they referred Fred Downs, who was a combat vet that had lost his shoulder and arm, and me, the street dog in Los Angeles, and I'd never met Fred. You know, he was becoming a bureaucrat on disabilities and stuff under Max and Carter, and I'm on the streets of LA. So we converge at the Biltmore. I mean, I don't know if it's still around, but I mean, it was like we'd never seen anything like this. And we meet each other. We're both a few years out of Vietnam. He's severely wounded. I'm on the streets of LA, But when we hit Montecito, where they had set up, I mean, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. There's this mansion, there's this huge table, they have the video going on, and Fred and I are talking or whatever. We have all these political science legends from all over the world talking about our war. Of course, you mentioned that beautifully in the lecture. And we're sitting here like, what are they talking about? I mean, this is our war. This is none of this. They were talking about it was a good war. It was the righteous. We should, all the political aspects. We're sitting here dealing with our brothers and sisters. And we're looking, and Walter, he's just magical. He's a magician in a number of things. He knew the timing of when we should come on. We sat all morning, like we're doing today, listening. And then he said, okay, you guys now can tell them about the war you experienced. So we're looking at who's going to go first. And we're sitting, there's microphones there. It's like Camp David, look just like Camp David. And this table is like a pool table with this beautiful velvet top, the speakers and everybody's name. We were like strangers in this foreign world. Walter's got this grin. He's sitting up in the booth above there where they're videoing everything. And Fred looks at me and says, who wants to go first? Because we were like, we got to set these folks straight. I said, you go. He cocks this chrome arm shoulder and drills it into that beautiful $1 million table. I mean, this iron hand goes in there. And that's what kicked it off. And he rolled in. And I mean, they didn't even want to ask questions after like you're doing. And then I rolled in about LA, and I looked like a street dog, and there are all these people from all over the world, and you could just see Walter was so happy, and that was really when he decided, because I ended up going up every month, staying with the Capps, talking about what are we going to do? We got to da-da-da-da. I'm just telling the story. And it ended up being the war class, Vietnam War class. And I'm real emotional. I know how you're feeling. I look at Lois. I see the orange trees. I see all the cars. I see everything. I shouldn't be saying this, but it's been one of the greatest journeys in my 53 years since Vietnam life was with Walter and his family and with the class. And that's about all I can say right now. But how it kicked off, I can still hear. And everybody looked, and I mean, I can still see the imprint like, man, are we going to have to pay for this?
Thank you.
I don't know, Daniel, I don't think AI can do that yet. No, I don't think so.
Yeah. And there'll be a whole panel about the courses tomorrow, too. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for this. I wanted to ask both of you to say a bit more about public humanities, and I was struck by I think you said the phrase was from the tower to the trenches.
Yeah.
That's kind of the older model, is that you just take what happens inside the university, you just kind of dump it out into the world and hope that people have an appetite for it, and that model is out of date. But it strikes me that Walter Capps did pretty well with that model, and has made a huge impact through his teaching just in a traditional university classroom. So I guess I want to offer a bit of a challenge and say, how can we think about public humanities stepping into new models, but also not lose what worked really well in the case of Walter Capps?
So much. Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Well, just, it should definitely be said that there's no public humanities work without the scholars being trained, in the universities and colleges in terms of, I think that's just that coming together. And you're right, the dichotomy of the tower and the trenches and then the military metaphor and all of that. I think really what we're talking about here is, yes, definitely the teaching, want that to continue, want those departments to continue. Perhaps a different idea, and my academic colleagues will know more about that, but can speak more to that about interdisciplinarity, or should there be a different way to approach sort of the disciplines, of the humanities exchange with one another. But then I don't even know that it's a new model. I just think that when I think about the public humanities, it's in the exchange of stories and ideas and experiences. So I am, as I was, as changed by hearing Sandro Cisneros, as I understand that she and other practitioners of the humanities are by being in public spaces. So I think what's shifted for me a lot is not, I don't talk about access in the same way, because that implies that we've got the goods, we're gonna open the gate and deliver. And that's not, for me, how the humanities happen. They happen when I am talking to the blues historian and the mayor of Rolling Fork, and they are proud of these signs, and this is a priority for them, is to have their history back in the ground in a town that's now of, I don't know how many hundreds of people decimated. So for me, I think it's always been happening, is more my point, that exchange of ideas. Maybe it's where it happens, who funds it, and I think also the idea of not coming into community to say you need this good, humanities vitamin or something, right? This is more, what are you looking for, community? And then it's planning and development of these programs, or there's probably a new word for it, experiences that are with and in communities. So coming from community centers, and those can be in and around campus for sure. I sort of, when people say to me, I talk about this a lot, but when I tell people what I do, they give me the head tilt. Oh. Oh, you do the humanities. Some people are like, oh, that's so tough, the lack of funding. Nope, actually last year, 20% increase from Congress. I mean, sure, there are a lot of cultural battlefields right now, but how is Sappho doing? Fabulous. How is Frederick doing? Great. There is, in community where I am, the humanities are thriving, which is not to say that there aren't crises and there aren't lots of threats, but the humanities themselves, I think, are thriving.
Thank you. Yes, Sean?
So this is fantastic, and I want to try to point to a through line, and hopefully it's a question to maybe be answered over the next day or so. But yesterday, Ed Linenthal, who will be speaking later today, gave a seminar and talked about some of the tensions and dynamics between survivors of different events and those who abstract around it, right? What Shad Mishad was just talking about, that moment. Maybe it's sort of the raw and the cooked in some way, and maybe our lesson is that things aren't so cooked as we want them to be. I'm wondering if, as a sort of a through line, we're hearing now about the advocacy for the humanities within the public sphere, which is tremendously important, and I'm heartened to hear how well things are going. And what part of, I think, what makes Walter's story so powerful, and Jim alluded to it, I think, in Ralph's voice, was the going into government, which, of course, Lois and Laura have done. And I'm wondering how we look at that story from all sides. The extent to which that voice of bringing people together, of putting perspectives in conversation with one another, can be accomplished in multiple spheres, in the academic sphere, in the sphere of the public humanities, which I think is about platform building. But then the question arises when we're actually doing it in a sector like government and we're building a program, how do we do that so that the abstract doesn't drive everything to the exclusion of the people for whom the program, their lives are at stake or their futures are at stake? So I'm not posing this in the sense that we can answer this right now, but in the sense that I hope this can be there's a theme emerging here from yesterday to this morning that it would be fun to explore as we continue.
All right. Laura, did you have your...
Actually, unsurprisingly, I have a very similar question as Sean, and so I'll just build on it because, well, first of all, thanks to everyone here, and I look forward to so much more. It means incredibly amount. But listening to David Marshall kick this off with history and our forefathers, they were men, and their allegiance, their affinity to the humanities, to the spirit, to these words. I was lifted up thinking, President Johnson was lifted up thinking, wow, that was so intentional, that our democracy is connected to these ideals and to the work that you all have dedicated your careers towards, and my dad certainly did. And then just to kind of juxtapose that with the reality of our politics now, I'm so happy to hear that the funding is increased, because I just wonder sort of, I just wonder sort of like what the mood is within the humanities, public humanities field now, and do you wrestle with how you do cross into the sector of elected people like myself, where there seems to be no connection to spirit or to intellect? I mean, not to be too depressing about it, but there isn't sort of that. If anything, it's a sort of a pressure to not be that way, right? To not talk down and to not, I don't know, I just was curious if that's even part of, are you just kind of understandably going your own way and cultivating it elsewhere, or is there still an intention to try to engage?
There has to be an intention to engage if you're looking at this Congress, right? So it will be not surprising. I mean, not all the time, right? I mean, if some offices don't want to meet and they just flat out don't believe in public funding, or they don't believe in support, and often in your reference to the forefathers and the history, that's very meaningful to many elected officials, but they just don't want public funding for it, right? Sure. So there are other ways that we can talk about that. But no, we cannot, and I'm reminded of this from our humanities councils in Mississippi, in North Dakota, some very interesting recent conversations in Kansas, in places where they have removed the words liberal arts from their buildings, from their curricula, and they'd like to remove the word humanities from buildings, from departments, from, and maybe not even the humanities themselves, but the language, right? So it will not be a surprise to you to hear that it's through personal relationships. So it's one at a time, and it is our council executive directors and other colleagues at National Humanities Alliance inviting electeds, please come see our exhibit on democracy. Please come see our exhibit on creativity and imagination. I'll give you a personal tour and I'll show you what these federal dollars are doing. We don't just have our hand out. We raise local money. We raise, it's a partnership. It's a private-public partnership. So I think that is really the only way. And this morning, I got a number of emails from elected officials, Republicans, about the House vote last week on the floor about eliminating NEH that said, nope, I'm not going to vote for that because I believe in your old history project. I believe in the monies that are coming. Now, that's not everybody, and this is a very different Congress than others, but we are for all, and yes, it's through that local story that we connect. We do not go our own way.
And I
That's
would
reassuring.
add to that I'm okay with this, that we've gotten a lot more sophisticated in the humanities community about making those political connections. So Phoebe's on the board of the National Humanities Alliance, and the Federation and the NHA have worked really closely together in the last 10 years in particular, and there's been support from the Mellon Foundation. So there's really an effort to look at those local projects, particularly the ones in the districts of, members of Congress who might not be assumed to automatically support the National Endowment for the Humanities or other projects, and to show them how vibrant these projects are for their community. And in fact, that language that George Washington used, saying this is crucial to the prosperity of the nation, is actually true. I mean, there really is an economic impact from a lot of these. And, it's interesting that Senator Murkowski has been a very big supporter of the NEH and has saved the NEH in some of those appropriations. I think it's the Interior Committee, actually, I don't remember what it's called now, that has the NEH. And Greg knows this because of his work with Native American and Indigenous studies, because the NEH does a great job of supporting language preservation in the Native American languages. And Lisa Murkowski has a constituency. She understands that in Alaska, that's really important for her voters and for her people there. So finding those connections, what speaks to them. So, for some people, you can just make the general elevated argument, but really, we've got to be sophisticated in thinking about, what's meaningful in that district in the same way that somebody would be talking about, building a plant there or something.
Right, and I'll also say the great work of National Humanities Alliance, and we're doing more of this, is that data and evaluation work. So doing some of that I don't know if it's hard science, but doing the hard science research on what are the impacts. Economic, yes, and the arts has done that beautifully, but for the humanities, what are the impacts? Studies coming out of the American Academy for Arts and Sciences, the Humanities Indicators projects about jobs for students who have humanities majors. So we're getting to that research and to that science. Interestingly, it's coming out from many different sectors now. So I think also referring to some of that data is really important to folks. And I understand that. For too long, we sort of said this is just inherently good, right?
Right. Well, thank you. That's reassuring. Just the piece originally when the CAP Center was started that I was most excited about was the internship program. Just to simply, to be as small and myopic as getting a handful of students every year who study ethics, study religious studies into public sector offices. So I know that continues, and something I'm super proud of.
Yeah, no, that's a crucial thing. I think we're just about out of time, so maybe one last question or a comment.
Okay. Sorry if you can't hear me. I have a little bit of a cold. I'm wondering if it's a little more simple than what we're talking about. we're always very siloed, and we're very siloed in universities. Now, I was an engineer major. I'm a venture capitalist now on the impact side, but I took this class, and I took the moral majority class he had. She's in Hollywood. She's in the food systems. Could we holistically think about education instead of just having a humanities department that in a state like ours where we can do things differently than Mississippi, have the governor say it's a requirement to take one humanities class when you're an engineer, when you're in Hollywood, and when you're in food systems. I mean, I worked on the space shuttle program, so I like to say it's not rocket science what we're trying to do, right? Because I know it. And I think we make things way too complicated and siloed in our world. And I think at a university, and that's how you spread to communities, is through the students. I didn't know what humanities was. I'm still not sure I know what humanities is. But I think there's a different way of doing it than going to the government. I mean, it's hard right now. So I'm wondering if you have time to even answer that, if we could think about doing something like that.
There are models, right? There are models from medical schools have mandatory humanities classes.
Yeah. Do you want to comment? Most universities do have general education requirements, but I think that part of the challenge for us is that the rubrics we have, the names, are not meaningful for students. They don't seem relevant, but the content of the courses truly is, they just don't know it. So humanities, word means nothing. Liberal arts, it sounds bad. Part of our challenge is that a high school student thinks that the same courses in high school are what happens here, so that English in high school is what English on campus is now. Our English department at UC Santa Barbara is a pioneer in the digital humanities with massive support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's the first department in the country to have an environmental humanities position, and we've hired several people in that. There's a literature and mind concentration, which gets into kind of cognitive science. So I'm looking for ways, I've been doing this for years, it's partly marketing, but it's partly like what we call the courses. And because people don't understand, students don't understand that those courses in religious studies are going to change their lives and be really important, because they just say, oh, religious studies, I'm not interested in religion. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is to think about these rubrics, but also how to kind of rethink the academic landscape. And in fact, if you talk to business leaders or people like you, people in industry, they say they care less about the major of the student. What they care about is critical thinking skills, communication skills, creativity, the ability to work in diverse groups, the ability to collaborate. And they can train you, in certain things. But that's really what they're looking for. But it's really hard to get that message through.
Maybe you get Hollywood to tell the story better.
Yeah. Well, and we work a lot with the entertainment industry on that too. So anyway, I think we're out of time. So
let's thank our panelists. What a great